I want to start with an announcement this morning. There is going to be a prayer vigil, a prayer for the Middle East tonight at St. Peter's Cathedral on Thomasville Road at 6:15. And I would love to encourage you to be there if you possibly can. It's certainly a time for prayer. I'll be leading it along with the Dean of the Cathedral, and I'll be saying a few things about the situation in Israel as a lead-in. But in any case, please keep the war in the Middle East in your prayers. Pray for peace. Pray for all of those who are involved in this tragic situation. I also want to suggest that it's a time to reach out to Jewish friends. If you have Jewish friends, maybe in the community or maybe in your past, someone I know reached out to somebody that she had been in college with more than 20 years ago, a woman who had become a Jewish rabbi, and she reached out to this Jewish rabbi friend. And the Jewish rabbi's friend said, "I've been working with churches in my community for years, and I know the pastors." She said, "But when the war began, no one called me." So I'd encourage you, it's not a question of trying to get to the same understanding of the war or somehow fix it, but just reach out and say, "How are you doing in this tragic time?" The Jewish community is divided in our country about the war itself, but they're all in pain. You may have Muslim friends who are going through similar pain, not because they're on a particular side, but because we don't have a great history of treating Muslims well when there's a Middle Eastern war going on. So, consider reaching out. I want to give credit to Justin this morning, as he was using juggling as an analogy, because he was juggling. Not balls, that's what I'm talking about, but he found out last minute that he had to do the children's sermon because Angela Jones is sick this morning, and a number of you are not here, of your congregation are not here because of illness, and I just encourage you to be praying for one another. But good job on that kind of juggling. And it's really a great lead-in to the passage. I was just reading this past week about another set of allegations against a religious leader. I'm not going to go into the situation because there's allegations in a denomination that most of you are probably unfamiliar with. But it's heartbreaking, and when those kind of allegations, and particularly the truth of some situations come out, it's poisonous in terms of reaching the next generation with the gospel. We were on a clergy retreat together as a diocese this week, and one of the things that the speaker pointed out to us is 93% of Christians make a commitment to Christ when they are 18 years or younger. 93%. That's most of us. And if we poison that well among the children and the young adults, it's going to be very hard to reach the next generation. The heartbreak of a leader who crashes. Can be a spiritual leader, can be a political leader or a school leader or a company leader. Most of you have been in a situation somewhere where the leader has crashed, their reputation is ruined, but in a sense, that touches everybody in the community or anybody in the school or company. It's a kind of PTSD issue for some of us. And the passage this morning is Jesus speaking very harshly about some of the leaders in Israel in his time. It's so harsh that actually some Bible commentators think Jesus could not have said this. Well, I disagree. I don't think we get to take parts in and out of the scriptures, but it does cause us to wrestle with what is he doing. I think the problem is that they don't understand why Jesus is so strong in his language. There are two parts of that answer. The first is cultural. Judaism in the time of Jesus, it was normal to use very strong language that we would find rude. They just found it a way to communicate. You see the same thing in John the Baptist. You see in some of Jesus' opponents. Being blunt was culturally acceptable more than it might be for us. But the reason Jesus did it is not just because it was cultural to be strong in his language. He did it to challenge and rebuke the leaders for their own sake. And we know later on that many Pharisees and other leaders do come to faith in him after the resurrection. So he's planting a seed to help them recognize their own sin, and that will bring them to grace and belief in him later on. So it's for their sake. But it's also to protect the people, not just for dealing with the pain of a fallen leader, but from falling into similar sins themselves. There are two great temptations for leaders that he deals with here. And they apply, and I want to talk about those two temptations and then how they apply to us, and then look at the Jesus kind of leader. Two great temptations of leaders, briefly, and Justin was working on one of them. They're hypocrisy and what I would call honor hunting, looking for honor, looking for respect, looking for the perks of recognition. But let's look at hypocrisy. Matthew 23:2. The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, so do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do. For they preach, but they do not practice. Now that phrase, the Moses seat, is interesting. I've been to Chorazim, one of the small towns that Jesus ministered in. They have the ruins there. And one of the things they've discovered in that town is a seat where a rabbi would have taught from the Torah, and it's been labeled the Moses seat. And you can see it there in that roughly how it would have been. It would have been against a wall. Remember that rabbis in the time of Jesus sit down to speak or to preach. And I've always wondered, why have we lost that tradition? That would be very convenient. It might be because they were there for a long time. So maybe you'll be glad that we're standing. But Jesus in the passage makes a distinction that we usually don't make. And I want us to notice that. We think that if a spiritual leader falls, then we, looking back, cannot trust anything he or she said. We just kind of tar the whole thing as negative. That's not what Jesus does here, surprisingly. One of the major causes of people leaving churches is because of the hypocrisy of leaders. And then they look back and they think, I have to forget everything he told me or everything she told me. But that's not what Jesus does. Look at verse 3. So do and observe whatever they tell you. They can be hypocrites. They may be doing many things wrong. But the stuff that you should pay attention to, because they're speaking from the Torah, the works of Moses, that's good stuff. Don't write it off just because of the failure of the leader, but don't do the works they do. Take in the teaching, sift it, but don't let their lives destroy any truth that God has spoken to you through them. Bad teachers can teach truth if their source is the Scripture and the preaching of the apostles, even if their lives contradict it. Doesn't that feel wrong? But that's what Jesus is getting at here. He believes that truth has its own power, its own integrity. Paul says something remarkable in Philippians chapter 1. Every time I come to it, it catches me off guard. He's got opponents who are talking negatively about him, but they're still, and they're hoping that he'll stay in prison, stay out of the way. And listen to what he says. He said, some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. So there's one group, the goodwill group, that understand Paul's imprisonment. But then he says this, the former proclaimed Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. I don't know about you, but I don't think I would have been as generous as Paul in that situation. But he believes that if something true is being said, God will still use it despite even the motives it's being said for. Now, obviously, teaching can be suspect if it is a twisting of the scriptures. And there are many warnings about false teaching and false teachers. I'm not negating that at all. But Jesus here is commending the teaching of the Pharisees in general, despite the way some of them treat their students. I remember an early mentor of mine, he told me the story of one of his mentors who had crashed in moral failure. And as my friend was telling me the story, he said, your faith in Jesus is not totally your own unless you can survive the fall of a leader. If it's too dependent on that mentor or that leader and they fall, then it really hasn't been sufficiently between you and Jesus. That's changed my life over and over again. So, the hypocrisy of a leader points us to the one leader who will never leave us or forsake us, namely Jesus himself. The perfect gospel came through imperfect leaders. Peter the betrayer, Thomas the doubter, James and John who wanted to destroy their enemies, remember? Now, leaders are called to a higher standard and are accountable for whether or not they're imitating Jesus. I'm not negating that at all. I'm simply saying that if Jesus believes that truth can come through unholy vessels, then we need to not write off everything and just discern for ourselves what was true in the midst of a hypocritical life. So hypocrisy. Second temptation of a leader, hunting for honor or hunting for acclaim. Jesus says, they do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries long. That's a description of their apparel, and their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. And they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by others. They're playing for attention. They're wanting importance and titles and privileges. And Jesus warns us not to look for special treatment because of the way we dress or are addressed or by what role we have. I don't know if you've been studying the story of Samuel Bankman-Fried, who got indicted for his fraud in cryptocurrency market. Read an interesting book recently called Number Go Up about the whole cryptocurrency movement. I'd encourage you to read it. It's an excellent book. And he's one of the main characters, obviously, in it. What was his goal? It may surprise you that his primary goal, what he was really hoping to be, was a great philanthropist. He talked a lot about, it's not for me, it's for others. And he gave a lot of money away. He also spent enormous amounts of other people's money, it turns out, on parties in order to display his generosity. Verse 5, they do all their deeds to be seen by others, looking for honor. Now, there are other temptations in addition to hypocrisy and the desire for honor. Sexual temptation, greed, and financial mismanagement, many others. But we've looked at two of the ones that Jesus is paying attention to, and now I want us to see how they might apply to us. I want us to take Jesus' rebuke as if he's speaking not to some leaders a long time ago or even to leaders today, but he's speaking into our own lives. And here's the irony of the situation. If we look down on the Pharisees, if we think we are better than they are, we're actually becoming Pharisees. Not all the Pharisees in the time of Jesus are evil, and as I said, many came to faith in him. And Jesus has endorsed much of their teaching. But listen to his rebuke of us. Are we hypocrites? And the answer is, of course we are. Of course we are. Let me give you one example. This was pointed out to me in a reading from C.S. Lewis, but he was using it in a slightly different way. Think about excuses that you make. We make excuses for our own bad behavior. I was too tired. I was under pressure. I can't be expected to forgive that rude thing he said to me. We're quick for excuses. But when someone mistreats us or falls short in some way, and then makes a similar excuse, we don't accept it. It's good. We can excuse ourselves. We're not nearly as quick in excusing others. And maybe they're right, and their excuse was better than our excuse, but we're not ready to hear it. We can be much kinder to ourselves than we are to others. So I challenge us to be more ready to question our own excuses while also being more ready to accept the excuses of others and forgive. Another example of hypocrisy from my own life. When my kids were younger and were running around yelling, or things were going crazy, maybe that never happened in your home, but in our home it was not that unusual. And I would come into the situation, it would raise my anxiety levels, and I was known for saying, relax, relax, relax. Guess who wasn't relaxed? The apologist Francis Schaeffer once used the example of how judgment might work. He said, what if you had a tape recorder around your neck, and all of the judgments that you made on others were then applied to you? We barely need the judgment of God. Our own judgments would be sufficient to condemn us. We are hypocrites. We also hunger for approval and honor and privileges. We long for recognition. Why do you think likes on Facebook are so addictive? We could look at that at great length, but that hunger is there in all of us. And we can twist things around to look better than we are and to receive more honor than we deserve. Is there a way out for us? Strangely enough, it's not just promising ourselves or promising the Lord that we'll be less hypocritical or less honor-seeking. That will not get us out of our struggle. Instead, we must ask the Lord to make us the Jesus kind of leader. And you may think, well, I'm not a leader. The answer is we're all leaders to this degree that others are watching us and are influenced by us, whether we know it or not. And Jesus calls us to look for the place of service rather than the place of honor. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. And in other words, he's saying we serve and he exalts. And that follows the ministry of Jesus. And I want to encourage you that Jesus can change you into a servant if you understand that that's what he's trying to do. Now, it takes time, and we will not be completely changed here, but there can be substantial change in the way we look at the world if we look at it through the eyes of Jesus, the servant. Listen to how Paul describes the pattern of servanthood in Jesus' life and how it can apply to us. He believes that Jesus will help us to think, to see, to understand the way he does. Philippians 2. This is the way a servant should think. He says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Have this mind among yourself, which is yours in Christ Jesus. Think like this. And then he uses the example of Jesus, and it's well known to us. But please hear it through the grid of servanthood, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And remarkably, as you look in other parts of the scriptures, we discover that he is longing to share that glory with us. Servanthood here. Glory. Exaltation because of his mercy forever. It's servanthood that will break through our hypocrisy. It's servanthood that will break through that deep desire to be recognized and honored and appreciated. Servanthood cripples this pursuit of honor. Instead, we seek to bring honor to others. Servanthood keeps us from hypocrisy because servants understand that they're in the lowest place and are humbled. As we serve Jesus, as we honor him, we discover at the deepest level that Jesus is the only leader who will never fail us, and we can serve him. Let's bow our heads for prayer.